Thank you for, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are just waiting for a few more people to come in from the waiting room. We're going to get started here today. So give us about another 60 seconds and I'll kick this off. And then we'll be turning it over to Brandon Mccoy from Veeam. Just one moment here. Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. Got a lot of attendees. This looks like a very obviously pertinent topic that a lot of people are interested in. My name is Dave Kluger. I'm the CTO over at Storecom. And I'm going to get started here and try to do a quick introduction about Storecom. And then I'm going to turn this over to Brandon Mccoy as a system engineer at Veeam. And just a quick background on who we are. Storecom, we've been in the business of doing disaster recovery and business continuity planning and consulting for many decades now. A lot of our consultants come from a background of helping with planning of DRBC solutions within the private and public sector. We've then we took that experience and we recovery as a service solution. And that solution is really focused on providing the best, the best technologies, the best options for disaster recovery as a service, as well as now being very much focused on providing the best possible security of your data, and especially when it comes to things like ransomware. I'm going to get into more of that later on in the presentation. Brandon's obviously going to talk a lot about that today. That's the purpose of this. Our solution, just a high level, we have a purpose-built private cloud, hybrid cloud offering, as well as also providing service provider solutions for on-premise also. And we have a number of offerings that provide these technologies to help with these with capabilities that Brandon's going to be going through today. And in general, we'd like to try to have the opportunity to help our clients the best ways to approach these technical challenges, and obviously working with the best of breed technologies out there, Veeam being one of them. There's a lot of offerings here we're going to go over today and try to solve a lot of the business problems that are out there today in technology, and especially trying to keep wrapping our arms around how to deal with security and data protection. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Brandon Mccoy. He's going to be giving a nice history on kind of where ransomware came from, where it's going, how Veeam interacts with this, the Veeam offering around how to help with data protection. And then I'm going to get a little bit further into the presentation, talk a little bit about our offerings and how we think we can help our clients. So thank you, Brandon. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks, everyone, for joining. As mentioned earlier, I'm Brandon Mccoy. So I'm a senior system engineer here at Veeam Software, located in Atlanta, Georgia. Been here about 4 years. And I deal exclusively with our wonderful Veeam cloud and service providers. So yeah, we're going to talk about ransomware. As David mentioned, I just want to take a couple minutes for a humble brag of Veeam and who we are, Veeam and the numbers. And there's a bunch of stats that you see here on the screen that we could talk about all day, but I really just want to point out one in specific, and that is our Net Promoter Score. So if you look down towards the bottom, you see our NPS, and this is a survey that goes out into all different kinds of industries, not just technology, IT. As you can see, Netflix, Amazon, some of the big players there. Basically just asking if you're satisfied with the product, the customer service, the sales, the whole pitch. And so whether you would recommend the company or the product to your coworkers, to your friends, and our Net Promoter Score is over 3.5 times the industry average. In the time that I've been here, that number has always been very high and has always continued to go upwards. Okay. So another thing I wanted to point out is some of our messaging. So over the years, Veeam's messaging has changed quite a bit to keep up with the future of IT. When Veeam first started, we were a free product, believe it or not, and all we did was take backups of VMware VMs. And that was it. As you can see in the name Veeam, we are closely aligned with VMware and still continue to be. But over the years, we've greatly expanded additional hypervisors like Hyper-V and Nutanix's Acropolis. We've also brought out support for physical machines with our Veeam Agents for a variety of operating systems, SaaS offerings like Office 365, which we'll be touching on specifically today as we go into the ransomware demo. And also just kind of bringing everything together. So one of the messagings is to be, first of all, the #1 leader in cloud data management, and also to have this availability platform. So as we began to deliver more and more products, it wasn't so much just this slew of products, throwing it to the wall and seeing what sticks. It's having a platform, lots of integrations. So the agents, for instance, being able to deploy agents for physical backups, being able to take backups of virtual machines, being able to go into the cloud, whether you want to back up to the cloud, you want to back up workloads already in the cloud, that data mobility and cloud mobility, bringing that all under one or as few different GUI interfaces as possible. All right, so with that, let's get into the meat of why we're here today. So I like to start this off with a quick history of ransomware. There's a very interesting story about where it all started from, and I'll just kind of give you the cliff notes here. If you'd like to know more information, you can always go online. There's a great website called KnowBe4. That's KNOW, the letter B, the number 4.com. They have all kinds of great tech industry news. It's where I learned a lot of this about ransomware. But the specific story about ransomware came from is very interesting, and they go on and on about it. So the first ransomware strain, this was known as the PC Cyborg, and it was introduced to the world in 1989 by a biologist named Joseph Pops. So Dr. Pops was at a World Healthcare Organization conference. This was an AIDS research conference, and over 20,000 floppy disks. Yes, these were floppy disks. This was the 80s. Were introduced. They were given through a mailing list of all the different guests that were at this World Healthcare Organization conference. So doctors, hospital administrators, and the likes. And it was disguised as the questionnaire, a health questionnaire in regards to AIDS research. And, keep in mind that back then there was no ransomware. So there was no suspicion to be roused from a diskette. You would just put it in your desktop and, not think anything of it. And as a matter of fact, this ransomware would stay dormant for a certain amount of time. And then after the machine had been plugged in long enough, a message would pop up on the computer asking for a whopping $189 be sent to a Panamanian PO box. So that was the Bitcoin equivalent back in the 80s. Is just having a wire sent to a Panamanian PO box. And this gentleman was caught, was arrested. There's a whole fascinating story behind it. I won't get into it here, but that's where it all started. By 2011, we saw ransomware becoming more large scale. This wasn't, some kid in his basement trying to, make a funny message pop up on your computer. This was actual legitimate business, especially with the introduction of Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency. Making it virtually impossible to catch these criminals a lot of times because of that anonymous factor. Now, today, in 2021, and even really since about 2018, we begin to see RAS, or ransomware as a service. That's right, ransomware as a service, complete with call centers. So these are vast affiliate networks of criminals underground. They have advertisements on the dark web. You don't even have to be an IT genius to do this. They can sell you the code, tell you how to install it. It's as simple as, mom and dad installing Norton antivirus on their computer, right? It's equipped with instructions of how to do it. And nowadays, because there's so many different ransomware viruses and strains, one thing that's important to note is back in the day when there was only a few, it was imperative that these criminals release your data once you paid the ransom, because word would get around that, ransomware X or ransomware Y, they would give you that data back if you paid. Nowadays, there's so many different variants, so many different names, and they're always switching. They're all around the country. There's really no guarantee that you're going to get your data back, because they don't have much of an incentive to give it back, because the names are always changing with what we see today. Okay. These are some of the popular ransomware strains. If you follow a lot of tech news, you'll see these names pop up over and over. And a lot of times, they're of a hierarchy of, one major company with different strains, all kind of the same criminals. So those are the popular strains themselves, and these are some of the more popular infection methods. So we start with the Trojan, which is the most common, probably one of the oldest, and you've probably seen this in your day-to-day life, maybe at work or at home, where you get an email and it has some attachment. Usually it's a very vague email. Here's your invoice, or some random skew of numbers and letters. So make sure you're not ever clicking on those attachments unless you know specifically what it is. Removable media. So a very interesting study done by a couple college universities and Google, where a bait USB stick was dropped in public places. There was nothing malicious on this bait stick other than a tracker to see who would actually plug this into their laptop or other device. And curiosity definitely killed the cat, with almost half of those bait USB sticks being plugged in. So, if we're ever out of this pandemic and we're back in the office, make sure you're not plugging in USB sticks, laying around the office. And if your computer still has a CD-ROM drive, definitely don't be putting anything into your computer. So malvertising, another very popular one. Maybe you're online, you're surfing, especially you think about now, we're all working from home. So we're using our company laptop to look on Facebook or to, Google, whatever, do some shopping, and you get a pop-up and it looks like it's from Adobe and it says your Adobe Flash Player needs to be updated. And perhaps it does, perhaps that's legitimate, but rather than clicking on this random link that popped up, why don't you take a couple extra seconds to go to the website and see if there are any new updates to download. Finally, social media and SMS. So I've actually experienced this a few times where one of my directors, my management team, way high up in the company, had reached out to me via LinkedIn with a message that was very vague, and I kind of right away didn't really trust it. And sure enough, that message had been sent. So this was a cloned profile. Facebook, same thing. People can get your friend names and they can make a fake account that looks like it's your friend's, or maybe your friend's account was hacked and they're asking you to click here, or they're in trouble and they need you to send them some money. So whether it's from a business perspective or in your individual life, there's lots of these infection methods that will pop up and are kind of the same in both areas. So now we dive a little deeper. We're going to talk about the cost of ransomware. And of course, the first thing you think of is, how much money is the hacker asking me to pay? And sure, that's a big part of it, but there's a lot of other costs that we don't really think about. The cost of the downtime, right? What if they lock out your production environment and all of your employees that you're paying X amount of dollars per hour can't work? You can't generate invoices for your clients, your customers. You can't sell your products. So there's all that downtime, right? And then one of the biggest costs of all is brand reputation. A lot of these companies that get hit with ransomware and customer data is exposed, that's very hard on the reputation of a business, or data is deleted and you can't get it back. Some businesses, unfortunately, never recover from that and have to close their doors for good. Now, this is a study of the largest ransomware attack that I could find. I created this deck back in 2018. So, it is a few years old, but this was the biggest one of that time. The city of Baltimore was hit with a $76,000 ransom. They were asked to pay this via Bitcoin. They decided not to. They instead invested money, time, effort into a forensics data analysis team to try to find where it came from, if there was any way they could unencrypt or decrypt the data. When they realized they couldn't, they had to scrap everything, get all new infrastructure, a whole new security team. They ended up spending $10 million in infrastructure, time to the company, etc. They also missed out on over $8 million of online payments, things like parking tickets and utilities, because people weren't able to make, the citizens of Baltimore were not able to make payments. So again, it's not just, we see here $76,000, which, of course, that's a lot to me, and I'm sure most of you. To a big business, maybe not as much. But again, there's no guarantee you're going to get that data back. You try a different way, you're down for all this time, and this ended up costing them $18 million. And unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. Ransomware costs are on the rise. If we look back to 2015, a little over 300 million. And as we go past 2021, we see the projected over $12 billion in the cost of ransomware. Now, you may be thinking, well, hey, I'm just a small mom and pop shop. I'm just a civilian with a laptop. This isn't going to affect me. But really, it's everyone at risk, every vertical, every sector. So whether it's online shopping, whether it's government, banking, health, especially with the COVID pandemic, and there's been a lot of hacks and ransomwares and spoofing around those kinds of things. And a lot of times, these hackers know that you're just a small mom and pop shop, and so they may ask for $100, $200, which is not a lot of money to them, but it's a good run rate. And then they may ask for hundreds of $1,000s from some of these larger corporations. It's all based on how valuable they think that data is to you and what you might be willing to get that data back. Now, one of the big misconceptions is that it's in the cloud, so it's safe. And look, I am one of the biggest proponents of the cloud. I love the cloud. I love our service providers that offer the cloud. But we always joke in IT that the cloud is just someone else's computer, and it is. There is something called the shared responsibility model, and we can talk about that if you guys aren't familiar with that. But basically, your data is your responsibility. There's certain things that, for instance, Office 365 protects, and that kind of leads us into our next topic. So Microsoft Office 365 for your email, your SharePoint, your Teams, your OneDrive. A lot of people think that they don't need to back that up, but that is just not the case. There is a number of reasons why you need to back up your Office 365 data, and one of them is ransomware. So again, big shout out to the website KnowBe4, no affiliation, not getting paid to promote them. I just love that website. And so there's a gentleman who used to be a hacker. He did the crime, did the time. Now he's on the side of good, fighting these evil hackers and helping companies to find weaknesses in their infrastructure and their environment. And so he actually created this ransomware strain in this video, and you can see it in the link below. You can see the video in real time. Our marketing team was nice enough to break this down into a slide transition so you can see step by step. So imagine, if you will, you are an employee burning the candle at both ends. You're very busy. You get an email from Microsoft, and it says, hello, I have a new feature. Obviously, it's from Microsoft. I mean, it says it is, and it's got the logo. It says it's anti-spam, and who's pro-spam, right? Nobody likes spam. So you're interested. You want to get rid of all those, the spam emails that clutter your inbox. You click the link. Now, you haven't done anything too damaging yet, but you have created the opening to where you are now talking to this server-side machine, to your client computer. And it's only asking for a little bit of read and write access to your mail. I mean, hey, we got to read these emails to make sure they're spam. We got to have write access so that we can automatically delete those emails. Like I said, you're busy. You don't really know much about ransomware, and you just, trying to get your boss off your back. So you're going to go ahead and click accept. Now you've done it. So malware has now began encrypting all the data in your Exchange account. If you look here, everything is in hieroglyphics. You can't read the emails. You have no idea what they say. You start to panic. Then maybe there's a little bit of hope. You get an email you can read. Unfortunately, it's from the bad guys, and it is asking for you to pay them $300. So, just imagine you're at a company and, you're just an everyday employee. Maybe you're new to the company and you panic, and, you're worried about getting fired or any other kind of damage that could happen to the company. You pay the money, you might not get the data back, right? What would you do? So luckily, we have something for that, and that is our Veeam backup for Office 365, which I will go into a little bit more in detail, and then we're going to move on. But I'm going to take a quick break here and see if there are any questions. So if you'd like to type those into the chat box, and then Heidi can read those off, and me and David will answer, and we'll continue after that.
Brandon, did you just send me an email saying I should go get $100 gift cards for everybody that's attending this? as target? Oh, okay.
No, that was not me. I must have been hacked.
Oh, shoot. Okay. See how easy it is? Heidi, I think,
Yep, we have a question. I've heard mentions of the shared responsibility model with SaaS offerings such as Office 365. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I'll take that one if you don't mind, David. Yeah, so that's a great question. So I kind of alluded to that earlier, and I'm glad we needed some a little more light shed on that. So the shared responsibility model is something specific to public clouds, and SaaS offerings with Microsoft is definitely part of that. So basically, Microsoft is saying, look, we have some of this in our court and the rest of it is in yours. So we're going to guarantee that our physical infrastructure is secure. We've got the armed guards or the badges and all the key codes and the biometric fingerprints. So you're going to have to be a James Bond type of fella or a female to get into the data centers and do anything like that. They're going to make sure their machines are patched and updated. They're going to make sure that if their data center gets hit by a natural disaster, power outage, that they have some geo redundancy, and that all that data, those services will be replicated to another data center. What they don't guarantee is that your data will be there. So yeah, you can log into your Office 365 account. Whether or not those emails are going to be there is kind of on you. And that's kind of what we saw in that previous slide. So, you can even look at the Microsoft documentation. There is a specific section that says point-in-time restore of Exchange items are outside of the scope of Microsoft Office 365. So you can do like litigation holds and you can do certain things. But in terms of searching for specific emails from specific days and restoring those, there's lots of different reasons why you need a backup of things like Office 365.
good info.
Awesome. No questions so far, so you can continue on, and we have another question break at the end.
Awesome. All right, guys, strap in. It's going to get better. So here we go. Like I mentioned, backup for Office 365, we're on version 5 now. And I got to say, when I started at Veeam 4 years ago, we were just introducing version 1. It was single organization, Exchange only, and just very, very basic. I mean, it did what you needed to, lots of nice restore options, but that's all it did. Now we're on version 5. We support Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. Last time I checked, this could have changed, but last time I checked, we are the only backup software that has native APIs into Teams. So if you look at our other vendors, even our marketing material before this version, we said that we back up Teams. And that is true because a lot of the Teams data, like your conversation histories, those are stored in an Exchange folder. And a lot of the stuff is also saved on SharePoint. So most of the Teams data we were able to have because of the fact that it was filtering into Exchange and SharePoint, but restoring that data was a little bit of a kludgy process. A step-by-step, it wasn't very easy. A lot of exporting and moving things around. Now in version 5, we have native APIs into Teams, which means we can back up and restore directly into Teams. A conversation history, the wikis, GIFs, the whole channel, the tab, all of that. And this has been one of our fastest growing products. The revenue that Veeam has made from Office 365 backup has been one of the fastest growing products. People are beginning to adopt this because they're realizing things like that shared responsibility model and the likes. So moving on. I know you're probably a little scared right now because of all the ransomware boogeymen that are out there, but don't worry. So now we're going to talk about best practices at an overall level, just things you can do to keep yourself from a proactive as well as a reactive in case you do find yourself in a ransomware situation. And then we're going to round it off with specific Veeam products that can help you with that. Afterwards, I'm going to pass it back to David, and we'll wrap up with any final questions. So here we go. So these are 5 steps that I put together, and a lot of them are, I would say common sense, but in the real world, while we're working day in, day out, we sometimes forget these things, right? When we're sitting here on a webinar with some coffee or your drink of choice, and it's easy to be like, yeah, of course, I'm going to do that. But then in the real world, we forget. So keeping all software up to date is a perfect example, even from a personal perspective. So I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been guilty of being on my computer, and then I get a pop-up that says, your system needs an update. Do it now or remind me later. And you click remind me later. And you click remind me later until eventually the cyber criminals remind you later. And then it's too late. So, take those couple minutes to keep everything up to date. Same goes, for our service providers. They're always making sure that they're up to date with the latest Veeam patches and their internal infrastructure that they use to host your offsite backups and things. Number 2, perform a threat analysis with your security team. So a lot of companies do this. They will actually hire people to find flaws, to find ransomware viruses. There was a really crazy story I heard the other day with a specific application, and I won't get into what application that is, but this was a very prominent application, very important, and an 11-year-old was able to hack into this system within 10 minutes. So, being up to date on the latest patches, having people try to find those weaknesses, those weak links is important. Number 3, training your staff on cybersecurity practices. So a lot of companies do this where you'll get an email and it's from a Yahoo account, or it's got some misspelled words, some incorrect grammar, and it's asking you to click on a link. And you click on that link, and it's actually from your HR team, and it redirects you to a video so that you can get a little more knowledge on phishing attacks and best practices for not clicking on random emails from a Yahoo account. No disrespect to Yahoo, just an example. And then number 4 and 5. So these are my favorite. Backing up everything at least once a day. And I get asked a lot of times, what is the best practice? How often should I back up? How long should I keep my data? And that's really not a question that you should ask, the software vendor that you're using. It's really a question that you as a customer or you as a service provider with your customer should be asking, how comfortable are you with the window between times you're not backing up, right? If you do a backup at 12 p.m., then you create a file at 1 p.m. and delete that file at 2 p.m. and do a backup at 3 p.m., that file's gone. So, trying to figure out how often data changes. Veeam has some great tools that can help you with that. Storecom, they have professionals that can help you figure out the right kind of retention policy you need, but also having an offsite backup copy. So Storecom, most of our service providers, they use something called Veeam Cloud Connect, which we're going to get into here in just a moment, which will lead us into our 3-2-1 rule. I am a big proponent of the 3-2-1 rule, kind of like Chick-fil-A. We didn't create the 3-2-1 rule, but we are huge proponents of that. So having 3 copies of your data on 2 different medias with 1 offsite. And a lot of times this is also referred to as the 3-2-1-1. So 1 offsite, 1 offline, all different kinds of crazy variations. But basically, if you have this 3-2-1 rule enabled, it should lead to 0 errors when you're ready to do recovery. So let's break down what a 3-2-1 would look like. So your first copy, and sometimes the 3-2-1 rule is confused with 3 backups. And there's nothing wrong with having 3 backups. But the first copy of your data is your data. So that's your production environment, where you're running. Now, your second copy is the first backup. This is going to be, in a best practice scenario, local disk-based backup. Maybe your more frequent backups as well, which is great, but you can see the issues here could be the entire environment get encrypted or infected, or some kind of natural disaster. Your data center gets flooded. What a lot of people don't know is that I won't say almost all, but the big majority of attacks come from when the intruder has already come in through the perimeter, right? We get asked a lot, how come Veeam Backup and Replication, our core product, doesn't have MFA? Which, at one point it may, but one of our product managers had a good point. Having MFA on the software is like having a very fancy, expensive vault surrounded by chicken wire, right? Because a lot of the times this is happening internally. So we can do things like having MFA on the server running your application, right? So just having a copy local in the data center is great in case your production environment is affected, but this is usually still in the same network and the same physical location. So we're going to use the offsite. That's the one in the 321. Having one offsite is your second backup or your third copy of the data. And Storecom, as well as some of our other service providers, use Cloud Connect. So Cloud Connect is a way for service providers to offer offsite storage to their customers without any kind of VPNs. Cloud Connect is using something called TLS, Transport Layer Security, and that's just an upgraded version of SSL, if you're familiar with that. Basically, it's encrypted traffic, and it lets multiple customers send their backups to Storecom. So these are two different repositories. One of those is offsite, so you can see the benefit there. And we dive a little deeper into the Veeam solution. So there's some other things we can do here. One of those is verifying your backup. So it's great when you see a green checkbox that says your backup completed. And there are some internal things we do, some disk checksums and silent corruption detection, swapping out dirty blocks, things like that. That is not a guarantee that your backup is going to work. I don't care which backup software provider it is. That's why Veeam has something called the virtual labs. We can do something called a sure backup. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the backup files and we're going to use Veeam Magic Sauce. The technical term is not Veeam Magic Sauce. It's actually called vPower NFS. We're going to do an NFS mount to the host. We're not registering this virtual machine back into the infrastructure. We're not rehydrating the data. So this is all under the hood. Usually takes under 5 minutes. And we're going to power these virtual machines off directly from the backup file, and we're going to create an isolated network. To be more technical, we're going to create a port group that will mimic your production VNIC, and all the machines are in this fenced off production. We're going to do a ping test. We're going to do an application of things like domain controller, global catalog, make sure those services are running inside the machine, and we're also going to do a VMware Tools heartbeat or a Hyper-V integration services check. So it's much more than proof of life. A lot of backup software vendors have a proof of life where they power on the machine and they show you the login screen. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's probably 80% of what you want. But actually getting in and checking the application, et cetera, is a lot better. You can also leave these machines up and running and do some manual interventions, such as some patches. It's a great sandboxing environment to deploy some things before you do it to production. Now, you can also use storage snapshots for this. So Veeam has integration with a variety of SAN vendors like NetApp, Nimble, 3PAR, IBM Spectralize. There's a bunch of others I can't recall off the top of my head. But if you have a VMware environment and you have one of these SANs, Veeam can leverage backup from storage snapshot, taking the load off of the host, doing everything on the SAN level, and you can actually use these SAN snapshots for this verification purposes. So giving you a variety of different tools and ways to leverage your data more efficiently. Now, Secure Restore, this is a feature built into our data labs that came out in version 9.5. I want to say update 2 or 3. I could be wrong, but it's within the last few years. This feature was added to our data labs, and this is great for zero-day viruses. If you're not familiar, a lot of ransomware nowadays, got to give it to them. They're getting smarter. They know that there's antivirus software that's going to look for an exploited ransomware. There's the Veeam backups. So, and I've had this happen where people call me and say, hey, I was doing backups, but I only kept them for 7 days. And then I get this virus that stays dormant so that it can't be detected by your typical antivirus because it hasn't been executed yet. It waits maybe 30 days and then exploits. So with the Secure Restore, you get hit with ransomware. Luckily, hopefully, you were backing up for a significant amount of time, you may lose some data, but at least you have a restore point to go back to. But before you waste your time or make things worse by restoring an infected backup file, we can actually do a quarantine of the backup file and use our antivirus software, your antivirus software, to see if there's ransomware in that file. And if so, you can either abort that operation, or you can restore the VM and keep it isolated and fenced off from the rest of production so you can do some further data analysis. Okay. So this is just kind of a step-by-step of what happens. Kind of got ahead of myself here a little bit, but basically we're just going to mount the backup file, trigger the AV, we're going to scan it and verify it outside of production, and then decide what we want to do from there. Now, kind of moving back to Cloud Connect, and Storecom uses Cloud Connect for both backup as well as replication. But insider protection is a great way to protect yourself from yourself. So there's two ways in which this can happen. First is if let's say you have a malicious employee and they log into your Veeam server, there's nothing stopping them from clicking delete all my backups or change my retention to 1 day. And so, your last month or two is gone. When you send a backup to Cloud Connect, so the folder that has your backups, the Veeam server has permission to send their backups and restore. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't work. So insider protection is for Cloud Connect backups, where Storecom can set a retention policy that is different from your regular retention. And two things can happen. One, if a malicious employee deletes the backups, they get moved outside of the folder that your Veeam server has access to into their global administrator recycle bin. Okay. Or there are ransomware viruses that will delete backups. And so for these, once again, if this insider protection is set, let's say you have your regular retention set to 7 days and your insider protection set to 14 days. So a ransomware virus comes in and deletes your backups, they will be preemptively moved outside of the window. Or if your retention has expired, but your insider protection is set to a longer period of time, it will once again save those backups outside the reach of the customer-facing Veeam server, so that you can retrieve them if needed. Okay. Another fancy option is immutable backups. So if you're familiar with object storage is a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-grow. It's not the same as disk-based storage where you're paying for it, everything up front. And it's a lot cheaper. If you were to look at, say, Azure, AWS, they have the ability to spin up a virtual machine and attach disk-based storage to it. They also have the option to create a object storage bucket, and the price per gig between those two is significantly cheaper with object storage. So backups are sent to S3 object storage because Veeam has integration with a variety of object storage vendors. Storecom also leverages some of these object storage and also giving you the added benefit of being that value add MSP, so that you don't have to worry about doing this yourself and make sure everything's set up securely. Well, but the underlying infrastructure is going to be the object storage. You can set an immutability policy so that backups are read-only. Ransomware encryption requires a write. They have to write an executable code to the Veeam files. Veeam files are VBKs for full backup and VIBs for an incremental. So the backups remain locked until retention expires. So here's my Veeam full backup. Here's my incrementals, say through the week or through the hours. And we're going to place a lock on them. So not only can you not write to these existing files, you can't delete them any earlier than the immutability policy is set. Even if, let's say, your Veeam backup job is set to 7 days, but your immutability policy is set to 14 days. The immutability will actually trump the Veeam settings and won't allow Veeam to remove older restore points because the immutability is set for a longer period of time. So once again, a malicious employee or a not so bright employee, and of course ransomware are all protected from these immutability settings. Most of what we've talked about has been for the virtualized environments. Like I said at the beginning, Veeam started with VMware, then we released support for Hyper-V. So we've always had a kind of a love and a passion for the virtualized environments. But of course, we have physical machines out there too. We're on we're getting ready to release version 5 of the Veeam Agents. So that's for both Windows as well as Linux, being able to restore a machine even to dissimilar hardware, being able to easily do P2V or even restore into the cloud. So for both Windows and Linux. And then I'll kind of wrap it up here with a little bit of monitoring and reporting. So from a proactive perspective, there are all kinds of alarms, even possible ransomware monitoring. So this is going to look at high read writes to a data store, high unusual CPU utilization, and you specify what constitutes unusual in the settings. And you can even have triggering actions. So if you do get that kind of alarm that your CPU usage spiked to 95% when it's always been like 20, that's a very odd thing. Doesn't necessarily mean it's ransomware, but you can run an antivirus software scan, shut that machine down, disable its NIC so it can't talk to the rest of the production. We see a lot of ransomware that gets one machine, usually a work group, and then it hacks through the entire organization through Active Directory to domain joined machines or through the network. So you can actually trigger scripts and things when these alarms go off. You can also have daily reports, we like to call them your morning coffee dashboards, to kind of see what's going on in your environment. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it back off to David, and then we'll wrap up with some questions.
Thank
David?
you very much. Okay, I'm actually going to flip over and share my screen. Might be a little bit easier to walk through this. Thank you, Brandon. That was great, very informative. I just want to talk real briefly about kind of our architecture now that I think some of the folks here have gotten an idea of some of what you're doing at Veeam, and some of the reference points that you brought up about some of the different technologies that you've implemented within your solution. So at Storecom, being a cloud service provider for Veeam, as you obviously alluded to, Brandon, we are using Cloud Connect. And we still also subscribe to the same concept of the 3, 2, 1, and 0 backup rule. And just to kind of lay out how we're doing that and how that would apply using us as a service provider. We have obviously your primary storage. We have our secondary copy here. So that's 1, 2, and then here's our 3, right? Which is all connected through this Veeam Cloud Connect. And this is your one-way data transfer. And this is what's creating that air gap, as Brandon brought up, which is so important today, because that's what keeps this copy safe from whatever is happening inside your environment. This copy over here, no matter what happens there, we have a copy that's over here that's safe because this data is only going one direction. Now, as part of that, it's very important to understand that, as you pointed out, Brand, right? There's malware, ransomware out there now that's going out and doing things like deleting entire backups, and there are potentially scenarios where that can potentially still occur, and that data could get transferred to us. One of the things that we do on top of that is provide a what we call in the storage subsystem, so at the repository level. So even if an entire backup set got deleted at the repository level and transferred over to us, at the storage subsystem level, we have the ability to roll that back to a different point in time prior to when that corruption or data was deleted. So that's kind of an additional value add on top of what Veeam is already doing. But what's also important here also is this other, because this is the one in the equation here. It's also important to make sure we extend that throughout the life cycle of your data. And making that a mutable copy, and whether that is using to a S3 compatible cloud, or as we're starting to do internally, we're using Object Store internally to archive data off to a higher performance tier faster, because one of the advantages that Object Store has a traditional file system. Basically, there's hashing that goes on inside these objects. Every single object has a reference point and metadata that points to it. There's no malware, at least today, that has the ability to write to that, because in essence, that data already is encrypted. it's written in a format that the malware doesn't have accessibility to. So the faster we get that out of the normal, what we'll call block repository, and into this object store, the safer your data potentially is in the long term. And because the object store storage itself is a linear file system, we have the ability to roll back to points in time earlier prior to any type of corruption or data loss. So this is really kind of the future of where, and I think Veeam is clearly making that direction also, investing in a scale out repository. There's more and more vendors that are being supported. Like you said, we're looking internally and building this out because this is really the way to really protect against this long term. But the other important part is this zero errors, right? As Brandon brought up, we have the ability to do sure backups within the Veeam labs, make sure that the backup jobs, the restores are functioning properly. There's no data loss from that standpoint. We can also do replicas from a backup job, or we can just be doing direct replicas to us. So this kind of lays out kind of our architecture, and this is kind of where we look to see in conversations with our clients is where we kind of get into what we call our ransomware recovery roadmap. And Brandon, you highlighted one other point which is very important here. When we start to look at things like our ransomware prevention and recovery roadmap, we really need to start at the source of the problem, which is how did the ransomware get in? I mean, a lot of people look at backup software and say, okay, so how are you going to protect my data? What is your recoverability capabilities? Yes, this is all important, but it's like any other, for lack of a better analogy here, disease. You got to look at the source. How did you get it in the first place? And that's where things like Veeam One and doing some of the proactive monitoring that you mentioned, as well as a number of other technology partners that we work with, we're trying to look at how we can stop that from coming into your environment first before we have to worry about, do we have a good backup to restore data from? When we're looking at that problem, we're farther down the process now that we've already dealt with, in essence, the data corruption or the malware may already be out there. So what we try to do in this ransomware prevention recovery roadmap is sit down with our clients and classify data, understand the type of data that they have, where are the potential, that may be, putting your business at risk from a data corruption or data protection standpoint. And we try to build out a plan. And as part of that is the on-prem solution. What are you doing to get your data off-site, and how are you protecting your endpoints? And that is our ransomware prevention and recovery roadmap, and that's part of our consulting. And one of the things that I think that hopefully sets us apart from some of the other service providers is that we provide backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, but more importantly, we provide the consulting practices around helping our clients understand really how to implement these. So our process of when we do one of these engagements is basically a discovery process where we start understanding the data that we'll be diving into, the applications and the endpoints, and then doing an analysis, and then coming up with this roadmap of how to get you to where you want to get. Understanding that not everybody can necessarily jump into, making wide sweeping changes across an entire environment, in day one. I think a roadmap is exactly what it's named to be, which is a roadmap of how to get from point A to point B. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So, at a high level, I just wanted to kind of wrap up what Brandon has been talking about, and let everybody who's on this webinar understand kind of where our practice comes into place here, and how we, think we can be an additional value add to what Veeam is already doing, is being such a an amazing technology partner, really doing a lot of innovation. Obviously, we've been working with Veeam for a long time, and Brandon, as you said, watching the product grow has really been quite impressive. What we've been able to do, and it's allowed us to be able to do a lot more with our own MSP offering for our own clients. So with that said, open up to any questions. from the standpoint of, Brandon or myself, that we can expound upon any further. I can't see my screen right now, so I don't know.
We have a couple questions. The first is whether or not the webinar is going to be available as a recording. Yes, it will be, and I will be sure to shoot everybody a link after the webinar concludes. The second question, and I think this probably applies to you, Dave. What are the major differences or pros and cons to backup as a service versus disaster recovery as a service?
Okay, great question. So at Storecom, we kind of at Storecom we kind of treat these as one and the same, and I think that's hopefully one of the things that separates us from some of the other service providers out there. So backup as a service is basically the practice. We'll call it Iron Mountain, right? It's getting your backups offsite. It's the 3, 2, 1, right? It gets my data offsite. Disaster recovery, business continuity is really the operational recovery. It's putting the plan in place to make sure that I can actually now recover offsite. Now, some clients say, you know what, all I'm trying to do for at least right now is get a copy of my data, that 3-2-1 rule, right? Get that copy of data offsite. We don't treat that any differently, whether it's backup as a service or disaster recovery as a service, from a standpoint of if a customer does replication, well, replication is clearly pointed at, I'm worried about operational recovery. I have 50 machines. I need to have a very low recovery point objective. And I have these 50 machines I want to bring online because I want to be prepared for disaster and have business continuity. A client who has backup as a service may say, I just want my copy of my data offsite, but we don't classify that from the standpoint of saying you don't have the ability to bring that and that data up in our environment. What happens is it's just a different recovery time objective. The more planning we put in place, when we start to build our DR recovery runbook, the more we do with that, the faster we can bring these systems online. And maybe some of those systems eventually do get defined as ones that we do quote unquote replication for, because we want a much lower recovery point or recovery time objective for. One of the things we've noticed that with some of our competitors out there is that they classify these as different, and they don't have the ability to rehydrate data from a backup as a service platform into their disaster recovery and business continuity platform. It's two totally separate entities. That is not the case. We can restore data from either platform, however you get it to us. It's one large, backend hypervisor platform that we have the ability to restore data from. It really just comes down to how fast. A customer who's doing backup as a service with us that has no DR plan in place, it's clearly going to take a lot longer than somebody who has a true DR BC solution in place where we've done our entire runbook with them. But we don't treat them differently. So hopefully whoever asked that question, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of how we treat it at Storecom.
The next question, Brandon, can you speak to any new Veeam products on the roadmap?
Yeah, actually I can. Typically I shy away from that question, but we're so close now. So if you guys follow Veeam on LinkedIn or any other kind of things like that, we have 14 new products that are going to be dropping in the first half. We're hoping for Q1. We finished all of our beta testing. We've got release and manufacturer write up. So I won't get into all of them because some of them are a little more unique and one-offs. But big things that I'm excited for. So we did just release version 5 of Office 365. So that is already out. That has the team support and a lot faster backup and restore operations under the hood. Big products that are coming. Veeam Backup and Replication version 11. Right now we're on 10. Version 11 is going to support quite a few different things. I'll name a few. Continuous data protection. So for those customers who have, recovery time objectives of, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. Today we do our replication with snapshots, which do have limitations in terms of how often. So now we're going to be able to replicate synchronously. So there's no data loss. We're also expanding our object storage integration to things like archive tiers. So, you can send your backups to object storage. You can then archive your monthlies, your yearlies to a cheaper storage. We've added some support for cloud vendors such as Google Cloud. So we have a lot of things in the public cloud space. If you have machines that are running in the public cloud, and believe it or not, it's not necessarily a competition thing between someone like Storecom and an object storage provider or a public cloud, because if you have workloads running in, say, Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, you can now back those up to your on-prem. You can back those up to a cloud connect provider like Storecom. So having that kind of cloud-to-cloud solution. So cloud mobility is a big thing we're focusing on. Backup and replication version 11 will also support Linux repositories immutability. So right now, for your on-prem disk-based repositories, you can back up to Windows or Linux repos. In version 11, we're going to have some immutability with the same kind of features that I talked about with the object storage now for your on-prem repositories. In version 10, we released instant VM recovery of any Veeam backup to VMware. So if you have a physical Linux machine, if you have a Hyper-V virtual machine, if you have a Nutanix Acropolis, you can now instantly restore that to VMware in seconds. In version 11, we'll have that same support for Hyper-V. So instant VM recovery has been around for a while, but now we're just kind of increasing that functionality. Veeam Agents version 5, as I alluded to earlier, grandfather, father, son is going to be available for standalone agents, so not having to have more products to do different kinds of retentions. We're going to also have support for Mac agents as well. So a bunch of other stuff, but I don't want to get too much more into that. Those are the big ones that are coming.
Yeah, that's great. We're at Storecom. Obviously, we're very excited about the CDP offering.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, we've been doing this with basically another product, and now it's nice because I think, as I kind of mentioned, right, with our DR runbook and our application priority matrix that we build, we now have the ability within Veeam to potentially have different tiers, right? Backup as one tier, replication for maybe our higher RPO and higher RTO, lower RTO and lower RPO machines, and then for the lowest, using CDP. So it gives us a single solution and a full broad offering from one vendor versus having to bolt different products together. So that's obviously a big thing. Also, what you guys are doing with the scale out repositories and object store is probably the most I find interesting and exciting thing that's going on right now, because it gives us the capability to provide obviously lower cost, better storage options, and still it doesn't mean that we are, like you said, we're not competing with the object stores in the public cloud either. There's still a place for those. We don't see that as a competition. We're building one because we see the advantages of it, and we want to use that internally as the next hop, in essence, for that backup job. So from basically the local repository on block to us, and then from us potentially to a public cloud provider for the longest term archiving.
Absolutely.
I think you basically just answered one of the questions, of which was why choose Storecom over public cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we think we're offering things, and we have some flexibilities that they don't. We think we're offering things in a way that they don't potentially have, the capabilities to do as easily. And we also have the consulting practices to help you walk through that. I mean, one of the things I think most people will attest to is that, Azure is a great technology platform, but unless you're Caterpillar, who's one of Microsoft's largest clients, at least in Illinois, you're not getting, you don't have a team of experts that are there around the clock to help you. You have to find outside consulting companies, whereas Storecom can provide that end-to-end solution, and still, again, leveraging all of these different cloud platforms as one holistic approach to all of this.
We do have one more question, and that is, can you explain air gapping? Is that the same as an immutable copy?
Either one of us can answer that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you go back to the diagram, go ahead. You want to go ahead, and I can bring
Yeah,
up
so
that
yeah, sure,
diagram that
sure. I'm
kind of
sure.
shows.
I'm sure we can both answer this from different perspectives. Yeah, so air gapping in its most literal sense is not I always say that the only way to guarantee something can't get hit by ransomware is it's not connected to the internet, right? So even with immutability, what if I hack into your object storage account, right? And so there's different sides of where someone could hack from, which is why we have the 3-2-1 rule. So you've got different networks, different accounts, different usernames and passwords. But yeah, air gapping, immutability is part of that. There's just this part where doesn't matter where if I log into the Veeam server, it has a connection to my repository, so that's not air gapped because it's on that network. I have the permissions. But when you make it immutable, or when you use Storecom's insider protection, we are removing that layer to where it can't be reached from the other side.
Yep, I would agree exactly with that. I mean, if you look at this diagram, this alone is creating that network air gap. But to your point, I mean, there's still ways for that data to get basically overwritten, corrupted, whatever. It's when you tie it with the scale out repository in an object store that you really have that capability. I would use this as a great example. So understanding really what air gapping means. There was a large multinational company who had multiple sites, and they had domain controllers on all these different sites, and they had a major hack that happened where their Active Directory got basically corrupted. There was one site that was connected over microwave, and during this time, that site had accidentally, I don't know the site, I'm not sure what the problem was, but basically the microwave system, the dish went down. What happened was, that was in essence, that's the true definition of being air gapped. They were air gapped because that domain controller hit them. And it turned out that one domain controller saved this entire company. Now, I'm using that as an example. Obviously, there's nothing new necessarily with backups, but it's a good example of how air gapping something really applies to backups and what we're talking about here, data protection, is that you have to do everything possible to make a copy of data that can't be accessed or used by malicious, in any malicious way, taken completely off of your network. That's kind of what this design here is, that my data can only flow one direction. I have this here. I have my point in time copies down here, so I can roll this back, and then I send the data off there. That whole process is really what, in the data protection standpoint, or at least backup world, is what I'm calling, or what we call, truly air gapping something. So hopefully that answered that question.
Those are all the questions, guys. I just wanted to let everybody know that our next webinar with Veeam is going to be going over backup and recovery for Office 365. And then corresponding with the launch of backup and replication version 11, we're going to be hosting a webinar too. So hopefully you guys can attend. We'll look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, thank you, and for everybody who attended, thank you for attending. And if you'd like to get more information, please feel free to reach out to us and schedule a time for us to do a call, and we can talk a little bit more about our ransomware recovery roadmap and what you've got going on in your own environment. Thank you, Brandon, very much. Great job doing the presentation today.
My pleasure. Have a good one, guys.
Yep. Hi, everybody.